First off on the agenda is just a quick intro on boundary systems and who we are. Now, for those of you that are familiar with this, this sounds the same, but basically we're a huge product development consulting firm here in Cleveland that basically operates in, not only in Cleveland, but also all the states that touch Cleveland as well. And we also just opened a training facility down in Orlando, Florida. And we basically do everything from, CAD management to data management with Windchill, 3D printing for, rapid prototyping. We also offer simulation services as well. So basically for any company that designs products using a computer from cradle to grave, we are there every step of the way to help them through it all. This just lists some of the industry awards we've had over the years. We've basically made the Inc. 5000 list of the fastest growing businesses in North America for the last 4 years in a row now. And so when it comes to our industry and what we do, we actually, know what we're talking about, and we've proven that with a pretty good track record. Next, I'll move on to Modelcheck. So what is Modelcheck? So Modelcheck at its baseline is primarily a tool that analyzes your company's models, and it uses that to basically enforce, design quality or company standards. And so you probably have, a company of, I don't know, just take the typical company where you have 20 design engineers, for example. In a case where, different people learn at different paces, and sometimes when you hire someone, there's such a huge, backlog of work that you don't even have time to send them to training, and so you just, throw them into the fire immediately. Well, what you begin to find is sometimes the models that people are producing may not be up to par, and so you'll need a way to analyze that to see, okay, well, are we getting good enough models so that way it doesn't end up, biting you in the back later on. And sometimes Modelcheck could just be used to enforce, company standards that you're looking to, to build into your models. And so that's really from a high-level overview, on why use Modelcheck. Now, some of the reasons for that are, for example, here, to enforce company standard violations. And so that would be, an example would be, if you have, typical, parameters that you like to include into your start parts or start models, for example, so that way it contains all those different, information in there. Modelcheck can help enforce that. Another case where I've seen that being used is, take an example of a case where company A acquires company B. Well, say, for example, company A, when they have their part number as a parameter, they have the parameter called part number. But in company B, their models have it called, PN. Now, in the case where you're acquiring them, you're acquiring all their, design and all their IP. You don't want to have someone sitting there checking, 500,000 CAD designs just to change one parameter from PN to part number. Modelcheck can help with that. And so it's one of those things where whenever you have company standards you want to implement, you can use Modelcheck to design that and implement those. Another thing that Modelcheck helps with is poor modeling practices. And so this is an example where users are creating models where technically it looks feasible from the start, but they're unintentionally tying their hands down later on in the future. And sometimes, well-meaning designers can do that, and it just takes Modelcheck to be able to analyze the model to say, oh, hold on, you may not want to do this right now because it's going to affect something else later on down the road. Or your model is, much bigger or much clunkier than it should be because you've had, you have so much more features than there should be. And so Modelcheck can sort of, stop, and throw a flag for users that are just starting out or users that are still, trying to get up to speed, so that way they don't end up, creating bad models that then end up hampering the design process down the road. And then finally, Modelcheck also helps with manufacturability or production problems as well. And so a typical example would be, if you have, a standard set of, hole sizes that you would like to use, so that way you're standardized on your drill sets. Well, you could implement that into Modelcheck to say, okay, analyze all the holes, and if you find one that's not standard, flag that. So just like in the screenshot there at the bottom, Modelcheck says, okay, I found one that's not in the standard hole size that you want, and so we can flag that so that way the designer can go and change that and not have not have a non-standard hole. So those are just some of the examples as to why you would use Modelcheck and what companies can hope to achieve from that. Now at this point, I'll pause for a second and get off PowerPoint here and show a demo of Modelcheck in action. Okay, so I currently have Creo 2 open, and this is a rim that basically fits in the broader context of this fits on a tire. So just taking a pretty simple example that a typical designer would have created, and now saying, okay, well, now they've built this, let's actually now analyze this and see what happens. Now there are a bunch of different ways you can run Modelcheck and use it on your models. One of the ways is interactively, so you can basically ask Modelcheck to run. And whenever we do that in this case, Modelcheck runs and it pulls out this report over here. Now I can begin to analyze the report and get a feel for, okay, what are some of the things in here. So if I take a look, one of the things it mentions is, that there are missing parameters. And so these are parameters that we've agreed as a company we want to have in all our models. And in this particular model, these 5 parameters are missing. Now the beautiful thing about this is we can then begin to pick on these here and then add them to the model. So I can say, for example, with the description, let's say it's, we'll call this here a prototype. And whenever I hit the add button at the top over here, you'll notice in the message bar it says, the description was successfully added. So immediately I just type it in here, Modelcheck adds that parameter in. Likewise, I can go ahead and add a couple more parameters. Say, for example, the volume. So we're going to, order, 20 of these. And then also the, who drew this model. Now, you also notice in this case that you can choose from a list of designers, and so you don't have to always type in something every time. I can say, okay, let's say, Erica drew this model, and so we'll add those 2 to it there, and then say, let's add those. And now you'll notice it successfully added the volume parameter and also the other parameter with Erica in there as well. Now, once I'm done adding parameters, and I'll just add those just as an example to show that I can begin to investigate other kinds of errors as well. So, for example, if I check the layers, it shows here, these are a bunch of layers that we've all agreed we want to have in our models, but this particular model does not have that. And so I can go ahead and immediately add all of those layers in. Another example of company standards that you can enforce using Modelcheck is to say, well, let's check some of the parameter errors. And so basically these are some of the current parameters that are inside of the model, but they're not created according to our specifications. And so, for example, the material parameter is not designated to the PDM system. And so currently the way this is, even though the material is there, the PDM system will not read that in and pass that information into your PDM system. And so that's the case where we can go ahead and pick that we want to add all of those and then update those parameters to the specifications that we want. Also, another good example of that would be to take something like this here, where sort of like the example I gave about acquiring another company or acquiring the IP of another company. We have an existing parameter called PN, but really we don't want to name that PM1. And so we can quickly go ahead and pick that and just say, let's rename that one. And now it renames that, and that's good to go. Okay. Other kinds of things that you can do with model check would be, for example, if I take a look at some of the user, I guess you could say, I don't want to say user errors, but some of the things that the user could improve on. You could, for example, pick over here to see, okay, what are round children, and you'll notice if I pick a highlight color that pops out, you'll notice model check quickly highlights over here that, okay, that feature in red, that lip over there is a child of those rounds. Now in this case, the rounds are particularly dangerous because if those rounds disappear, then the round children are also affected as well. And so you can pick on something, highlight that, and see, okay, that's the round child, and so now I can see a feature that I can go fix or redefine, to reference something other than a round. Also, another example of that would be if I, check this here to say, for example, the buried features. And so this basically shows me here, if I highlight this, I'll notice I have those two circles, highlighting right over top of the existing hole. Basically what's going on there is I have 5 physical holes in my model, but internally that pattern is defined as a 6-hole pattern with a spacing of 72 degrees equally. Well, whenever you have that, you're going to have one hole overlaid on top of another. And so model check flags you here to say, hold on, you're technically building a hole on top of a hole, and that's why you have that buried feature. And so your designer can then go and fix that, so that way it doesn't mess up the model. Now, another, I guess you could say a final example on this would be, actually before I move on to that, I'll show something else over here. Over here where we have early rounds, again, model check analyzes the model and says, okay, well, you have rounds earlier in your model tree than you should. Now, one of the things we can do with this is we can, say, for example, that's the name of the check. We can copy that, and you can access PTC's new help center, which is basically help.ptc.com. And whenever you go there, you can basically then, search for the name of that model check. And when you do that, it pops out the result. And in this particular case, for some of these checks, not only does it tell you, what the check does, but it also there's also a Creo Modelcheck teacher. And so basically, your designer can then pick on this, or you can print this out as a CAD admin for your designer and say, well, let's pick on that. Why are early drafts and rounds dangerous? And this article here explains why. And so for a new user that's starting to use model check, not only does it tell you why something's wrong, but not only does it tell you that something is wrong, but it also can tell you why it's wrong as well by looking at the help files for that particular check. Now I'll minimize this for a second and get back to our Creo session here. The last thing to highlight would be, for example, things like manufacturability considerations. And so if I turn on some of the green checks, in this case these are items that Modelcheck checked for and they passed successfully. One of the ones I'll note here is over here for hole diameters. So basically, it checked all the holes in my model against a list of hole diameter sizes that we've given it, and it checked to see, what, every hole in here passes, and so I don't flag that as a red flag. And so you can use this to enforce, again, manufacturability considerations whenever you're building your models. Now we'll move on to a different model here, and I'll show some other functionality about model check. Next up is this particular one here, and this highlights something else about model check. So one of the ways you can have it run is to do that interactively. So basically, you ask it to run, like I did in the first exercise. Now over here, what we're going to do is we're going to show how model check can basically run on the fly without you even asking it for anything. And so in a case like this here, I'll take this model and say let's change that dimension. So we'll make that 0.75. And you'll notice whenever I regenerate, my message bar tells me model check process completed successfully. So it doesn't pull out the web browser, but basically it tells me in the background, whenever you regenerate it, I ran model check, the model looks okay, and so everything you can continue. Now, in a case when I can then say, well, okay, what if I, take something like this here and make another change, regenerate, and now model check pops out and says, hold on, you have a buried feature. Now, once again, I can resize this here so that way I can see my model, and then pick on the feature, and let's highlight that in blue. And you'll notice it highlights that for me over here again, so basically a hole on top of a hole. And if I edit that feature again, what I'll find is I basically asked it for 6 holes at a spacing of 72 degrees each, which basically will give me a hole on top of a hole. And so now if I change that to 60 degrees, for example, let me close this here. I'll regenerate again, and now this time it ran and it didn't pop out the browser, because now it knows, okay, the model analyzed and everything is good. And so you can configure model check to run a couple of different ways, either whenever you ask it to run or whenever you regenerate. Likewise, model check can also run in modes where whenever you save the model, if you want to prevent a bad model from being saved, or to pop out a highlight whenever you're saving that model, you can also configure that. And also it can run in the batch mode as well. Okay. Next, we'll show how model check works with assemblies. So this over here, so this is an assembly of the entire wheel all together, and this time we're going to ask model check to run. And whenever I do that, it pops out and says, okay, do you want to run on just the top level assembly or the assembly and all the models inside of this session right now? And you'll notice even if I say all levels, model check analyzes for about a couple seconds, and it pops out with the results. And so it doesn't even take that much time to analyze an assembly and then pop out with the results. Now, some of the other things we can highlight from here, if we go over to the assembly models, I can see the model check analysis on all those different individual models that it ran. And so, for example, the lug has 1 error and 1 warning. And so I can pick on that and begin to examine the model check report for that lug part. And so basically what this shows is instead of opening each individual part and analyzing it that way, you can open the top level assembly and analyze all the subcomponents inside, and then begin to pick each of those reports and for the components, and then examine them one by one. Now I'll step back here a little bit, and another thing I'll highlight here is the failed checks. And so if I pick on this here, one of the things it'll highlight, and again, one of the things that you can use model check for, is this check for duplicate models. And so if I do that, it tells me here, hold on, so the log that you have is a duplicate model. And whenever I go to that model, I can pick on that, and it shows me here the current model you have is what's in session right now, but there's another part called the lug released that's basically 80% matching geometrically with what you're currently designing. And so basically now I know, well, instead of redesigning something that we already have, which not only wastes engineering time, I can just pick that released lug and use that instead. Because another thing is we know that that's already released, and so it's passed all of our design checks, and I don't have to rebuild something that that's not yet released. And so again, that's another way that model check can be used to enforce design qualities, to check for duplicate models, and then flag you to say, hold on, you may have something here that that's a duplicate of something else. Now finally here, I'll pop out how Modelcheck works with drawings. Now in this case, again, we're going to ask Modelcheck to run, and you'll notice it also gives you the option of running Modelcheck not only in the drawing file, but also on all the models that are connected to the drawing. In this case, we're going to hit no, and we're just going to say let's run with that. Now what happens is it pops out the result, and again, I'll resize this here so that way I can see my screen. And it pops out a few things. So first off, one of the things it tells me is that there are multiple models connected to this drawing that are not being used. So none of their dimensions are being shown, none of the views are being shown from those models. They're just basically adding extra overhead. And so every time you save this drawing, it'll save those two models that don't contribute anything to the assembly or to the drawing. And so right here I can just say, you know what, that was probably, the designer maybe intended to do that, but for that, you can delete those unused models, and it deletes those immediately. Another thing we can do is to say, for example, let's check for, overlapping views. And you'll notice in this case, instead of a red X for an error, in this case it gives us a warning. So technically you could get by with it, but you may not want to do that. And now I can say let's highlight that in red and highlight, and you'll notice it highlights both of those the borders of both views, and I can see right here there's that one view over here and this one overlapping against it. Other things that Modelcheck can do, especially in a drawing context, is you can use it to analyze notes for spelling errors. And so this is a case where when I check this here, I can say, for example, I want to highlight this in red, and it pops out the exact note, and I can see right there there's a spelling error where it's basically spelled otherwise without the E. Now, the other thing you can do with Modelcheck is if in the case where it flagged a legitimate word that you do not want it to to flag as a spell error. So for example, if my if the name of my company was PBY Industries, and Modelcheck flags PBY the very first time I run it, well, whenever it flags it in here, I can just say add to dictionary. And so that way I can teach Modelcheck, oh, by the way, next time don't flag PBY because that's my company name. And so you can teach Modelcheck, for what to flag and what not to flag. Now in this case, I can see right there, instead of having to edit the note, I can just, pick on this right here and say, let's modify this right from Modelcheck. Give it the correct spelling, and let's modify that. And you'll notice it changes the note immediately. Okay. Also, another one that I like to show, which is one of my favorite, is the fudged dimensions check. And that's where you sometimes have designers where typically the best practice is as you design your CAD model, you should show the graphic dimensions from the model onto the drawing. Or what if you have a case where designers, instead of doing that, they basically type in a different dimension value, so they're basically fudging their dimensions. Well, Modelcheck can check for that and say, hold on, you have one of these here that's a fudged dimension, and if I highlight that in red, I'll notice this 2.8 pops up. And so whoever made this drawing basically fudged that number, and the actual length is not 2.8, or may not be 2.8. And so now I can analyze that and then go ahead and go fix that, or in this case, make it show the original dimension. So from a high-level overview, from a pretty good overview, that covers Modelcheck in terms of how your users can interact with it, either interactively by asking it to run, or configuring it so that whenever they do something that triggers a red flag, Modelcheck can immediately pop out and just say, hold on, you shouldn't be doing that. Okay, now we'll go ahead and switch back. Okay, now at this point we're going to pause and switch to questions. And so if you guys have any questions or comments for me about Model Check, how to use it, what are some of the things it can do, and how to implement it, this is the time when you can ask that. If you look on the GoToMeeting panel on the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a red arrow that you can click on to pop out the panel. And once that pops out, you'll see the questions applet over there, and you can basically pick on that and ask questions. Okay, so we have our first question here, basically asking, when checking for duplicate models, does it use your search paths to know what directories you're looking into? Now that's actually one that, okay, yeah. So that's when I'll actually have to look into that and get back with you offline to talk about. I do know with duplicate models, you can basically spit out the contents of all the files or folders in a particular directory, and then have Model Check to analyze those particular files. But when it comes to checking your search paths, that's when I'll have to confirm about and then get back to you on. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, I have another question here asking, is the dictionary built into Model Check? Yes. Yes, so the note checking dictionary, or I guess the spell checking dictionary is built in, and with that, you can also modify it as well. And so basically it comes with some pretty standard words. And whenever your user runs that and it flags, for example, something that should not be flagged, like PVY Industries, for example, you can teach it by telling it, to add it to the dictionary, and then it adds it to its list of accepted words. And then likewise, if you have a case where I don't know, users use a particular word that you don't want to use in any of your notes or text in your drawings anymore. So say, for example, we'll use the word test. If we know that sometimes they've used that word in the past and we do not want to use that word in our drawing notes, we can add that to a list of unacceptable note words. And then when it's checking for that as well, it'll also say, hold on, you told me you don't want to use this word, but I found it in the drawing here. You want to remove that. Are there any other questions regarding Model Check? Use that. Okay. So I have a question here asking, can Model Check verify that a particular drawing meets a particular ASME standard? Now for that, Model Check cannot directly verify that. The checks in Model Check cannot directly verify that. So what you can do is to, when you're creating the detail file or the DTL file, there's certain options in there that give you the option for, which kind of drawing standard, you want to show. And in that case, from the DTL file perspective, if you pick the options that show the ASME standard, then when the drawing is being designed or being detailed out, it will spit out the ASME standard. And so that's something you would take care of more so from a designer standpoint and not so from a Model Check standpoint. And then we have another question here that how does Model Check tie into Windchill? And that's a wonderful question. So basically with Windchill, You can have model check and windshield run independently or hand in hand. So if they run independently, then your designers can, use model check, run with it, and once you're done, you save it into windshield, and that it passes into windshield, and windshield doesn't even know that model check is there. When they run hand in hand, what you can do with that is you basically turn on the model check gatekeeper in windshield, and what that does is windshield will then check for certain parameters or information from model check, and then use that as a gatekeeper to determine if people can, check in models or not. And so an example would be, when was the last time model check was run, and what was the number of errors that that was generated. And so you can configure windshield to say, okay, if model check, was not run within the last 24 hours, don't check it in. And also, if model check has more than 3 errors that's reported in the model, don't check it in. Until then, that forces your users to A, run model check before checking it in, and B, fix a lot of their models or errors before checking it in. And so you can use that to then enforce company standards as well. Are there other questions on this? Okay. Another question I had in here is it possible to tell model check to skip certain models? And so by that we mean, say for example, we have, we typically make models, A and B, and models A we want to enforce, and models B we, do not want to enforce with model check. One of the things that model check has built in is there's a parameter functionality where you can put in a particular parameter, and when model check reads that in, it recognizes, okay, that it does not have to analyze that particular model. And so I know from an administrator perspective, sometimes, administrators are tasked with, not necessarily being an all or nothing approach of, analyze everything or nothing, but rather we want to analyze these particular kinds of models for errors. And you can basically analyze those and not, the other ones that you do not want to analyze. Are there any other questions at this point? Okay, cool. So at this point, we will be ending the webinar right now. If you have any questions or concerns, you can always contact me or email me. My email address is basically my S and then my last name, sshinbore @boundarysys.com, and you can email me about this webinar or any other questions you have about model check, and I'll be glad to answer those. Also, I'll mention before we head off here, don't hesitate to head to our Boundary Systems website to see the other upcoming webinars that we have. I think the next one over here is coming up is Keyshot, which is an extremely powerful rendering tool that you can use that ties in perfectly with Creo Parametric. And with the push of a button, you can push your models, out of Creo into a powerful industry-leading rendering application. And then next up, we have the eTraj webinar coming up, which is basically a publisher that you can use to help publish PDFs immediately from your windshield data. And then next up, the one I'm really excited about is the Creo Unite webinar, which basically talks about the Unite functionality. So I know some of you have heard about Creo 3 coming out and the fact that it can read or open CAD packages from different CAD formats. So SolidWorks, CATIA, NX, and UG. That Creo Unite webinar is going to highlight that functionality and how it actually does work. And so that's one where you're definitely not going to want to miss. And at this point, we'll stop the webinar now. Thank you so much for attending, and appreciate you being here. Thanks. Bye.